Imagine this. You just checked into one of the most luxurious hotels in America, the Grand Monarch Hotel in Beverly Hills. The lobby smells of fresh lilies, crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling, and everyone around you looks like a celebrity or a billionaire. This is where the richest people in the country stay. But when you call for room service later that night, the front desk tells you something that makes your blood run cold. The room you are staying in does not exist. Before I go further, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Are you watching late at night or in the middle of the day? Ryan Parker had just finished a huge business deal in Los Angeles. He was exhausted and just wanted one quiet night of celebration. At check-in, the receptionist, a woman with an unsettlingly perfect smile, said, "Mr. Parker, we have a complimentary upgrade for you, our signature Imperial Suite, room 606. Ryan thanked her, surprised. The key wasn't a normal card. It was heavy brass with a golden symbol carved into it. No number, no logo, just a strange symbol. When Ryan opened the door, the suite was breathtaking. Crystal lamps glowing warm light, a marble bathroom the size of a small apartment, a massive bed with silk sheets, a private balcony with a view of the entire LA skyline. But something felt off. The room was perfectly clean. Too clean. It didn't feel like anyone had ever stayed there. The minibar was fully stocked, but every label was slightly faded, like it had been sitting untouched for years. Have you ever stayed at a hotel where everything felt just a little too perfect? Did it make you feel safe or uneasy? Comment below. Ryan showered, changed into a robe, and sat on the bed. He turned on the TV, expecting late-night news, but the screen flickered and showed black and white footage of the same room, from years ago. He saw different guests on the screen. Some were crying. One man was banging on the door trying to get out. A woman sat on the floor screaming. And then the footage cut to static. There was a knock at the door. Ryan jumped. He opened it. No one was there. The hallway was silent. When he turned back into the room, the bathroom mirror was fogged up. Slowly, words formed in the condensation. "Get out before 3 a.m. Ryan grabbed the phone and dialed reception. "Something weird is happening in my room," he said. "Room 606. There was silence on the other end. Then the receptionist replied calmly, "Sir, there is no room 606 in this hotel. Are you sure you have the right number?" Creepy, right? If you're still with me, hit subscribe right now and tell me in the comments what would you do if this happened to you. Ryan felt a chill. He walked to the door and looked at the number plate. It was blank. The hallway lights flickered. Suddenly, every door on the floor had no number at all. It was 2:59 a.m. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. The curtains began to move, though the windows were closed. The room phone rang. He answered. A distorted, inhuman voice whispered, "You should have left." The lights went out. In the glass wall, Ryan saw reflections, dozens of pale figures standing behind him. They had no eyes, just empty sockets. He ran into the hallway, but something was wrong. No matter where he turned, every hallway looked the same. Every door was identical, and everyone had the same golden symbol. After what felt like hours of running, Ryan collapsed near a stairwell. That's when he noticed a leather-bound guest book lying on the floor. He opened it. Each page had a name, a date, and the words, "Never checked out." The last page was blank. Ryan picked up the pen lying next to it, and his hand started writing his name by itself. "Where are you watching this from? Is it night where you are? Because if it is, this next part might make you turn on the lights." Ryan finally reached the lobby. It was pitch black. The giant crystal chandelier was swaying like something had just moved past it. The front desk staff stood frozen, not breathing, not blinking, like mannequins. An old man in a faded hotel uniform appeared and said softly, "Room 606 was sealed 20 years ago. There was a fire. Everyone who stayed there that night never left." Ryan turned around. The pale, eyeless figures were standing behind him now, closer than before. The brass key in his hand melted into black liquid, and before he could scream, he was back in the bed of room 606 like nothing had happened. Only now the guest book was lying open on the nightstand. His name was permanently written on the last page. The next morning, sunlight filled the room as if nothing had happened. Ryan packed his bags quickly. When he reached the lobby, the staff looked normal again. He handed the brass key to the receptionist. She smiled, that same unsettling smile from the night before, and said, "See you tonight, in room 606. If you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, if you were given the key to a room that doesn't exist, would you dare to spend the night?" Story Note 2. The Sapphire Star was the most luxurious cruise ship ever built in America. A floating palace with ballrooms, private casinos, restaurants run by celebrity chefs, and suites that cost more than most houses. Emily Hayes boarded the ship with excitement. She had been working in finance for 6 years, and this was her reward. A solo vacation on a ship that promised to take her from Miami to the Caribbean in absolute luxury. On the first evening, Emily explored every corner of the ship. There was a piano lounge with soft jazz playing, an infinity pool lit by glowing blue lights, and a private observation deck for VIP passengers. Everything smelled of champagne and salt water. Her cabin was on deck 7, a corner suite with glass walls looking straight out to sea. But as soon as she entered, she noticed something odd. The welcome letter on her table wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to someone named Margaret L. Harper, dated 1976. She thought it was just a mix-up, until she saw the photograph tucked under it. A black and white picture of a woman standing on the deck, the same suite she was standing in now. The first night passed quietly, but just after midnight, Emily woke to the sound of footsteps pacing outside her cabin door. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty. The ship was silent except for the distant sound of waves. The second night, she woke again. This time, the footsteps were inside her room. She sat up quickly and saw a woman's reflection in the glass wall looking out to sea. But when she turned around, no one was there. By the third night, she was shaken. She went to the reception desk and asked if anyone had stayed in her cabin before. The receptionist hesitated, then said, "That suite was closed for years. You shouldn't even have been assigned there." Emily's stomach turned. She returned to her cabin, and the lights were already on. The photograph was back on the table, but this time the woman's face had been scratched out. The ship entered a storm that night. Waves crashed violently against the hull, making the entire ship groan. Emily tried to sleep, but just before 3 a.m., the cabin phone rang. When she answered, there was only static, and faintly, a woman's voice whispering, "Come to the observation deck." Emily wrapped herself in a coat and stepped into the hallway. The ship seemed empty. The usual hum of engines was gone, the air eerily still. She made her way to the observation deck. At the far end, near the railing, she saw a figure, a woman in an old-fashioned dress soaked with seawater, her hair clinging to her pale face. Emily froze. The woman turned to look at her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she pointed toward the ocean. Emily walked slowly to the railing and looked down. The water below glowed faintly as if lit from underneath. And then she saw them. Dozens of pale faces staring up from beneath the surface. Panicking, Emily ran back to her cabin. But no matter which hallway she took, she ended up back on the observation deck again. The storm howled louder, the deck slick with rain. The figure of the woman was now closer. Suddenly, the ship's lights went out. Only the lightning illuminated the deck now. Each flash showed the woman a few steps closer. Emily backed away until she felt the cold railing behind her. The next lightning flash revealed that she was no longer alone. The entire deck was filled with wet, drowned figures, passengers from decades ago. They moved toward her slowly, their eyes dark and hollow. The ship tilted violently as a massive wave hit. Emily grabbed the railing, but one icy hand wrapped around her wrist. She screamed and pulled back, and suddenly everything went silent. Emily woke up in her bed, sunlight streaming through the glass walls. The storm was gone. She rushed to the hallway. Passengers were laughing, drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. When she reached the reception desk, the receptionist smiled and said, "Good morning, Miss Harper. We hope you enjoyed your stay." Emily froze. "My name isn't Harper," she said. The receptionist tilted her head and replied, "It is now." Emily turned to look out the glass wall of the lobby and saw her reflection staring back at her. Only it wasn't her face anymore. It was the woman from the photograph. The sapphire star sailed on toward the horizon, carrying its newest ghost with it. Story No. 3. When the Harrington Tower opened in downtown Chicago, it was the tallest, most advanced skyscraper in the city, a gleaming monument of glass and steel. But after only 3 years of operation, the entire building was suddenly shut down. People whispered that something had happened there, an accident that killed an entire floor of employees. The company never gave a statement. The tower was sealed, its lobby chained and padlocked, and security was posted outside 24/7. 10 years later, a group of urban explorers decided to sneak in one stormy night. James, a freelance videographer, led the group. He was filming a documentary about abandoned places in America. His friend Sarah was with him, along with Mark and Lena, two thrill-seekers who loved ghost hunting content. The storm made it easy to get past the lone security guard. He was asleep in his booth, rain pattering on the glass. They cut the lock and stepped into the lobby. The lobby was enormous, marble floors glistening under their flashlights. Everything looked frozen in time. Papers scattered on desks, coffee cups still half full. It was as if everyone had just gotten up and left one day. James started filming. The deeper they went, the colder the air felt. The elevators weren't working, so they climbed the stairs to the 13th floor, the floor where, according to online rumors, everyone had died. As soon as they stepped onto the floor, the lights flickered on by themselves. "This place still has power," Mark whispered. At the far end of the hallway, they saw something strange. Every office door was standing open, but there were no desks, no chairs, nothing, just empty rooms. Except for one. At the very end of the hall, the last office still had its glass door closed, and inside they could see the silhouette of someone sitting at a desk. Lena gasped, "Do you see that?" James approached slowly, filming. When he opened the door, the chair was empty, but the computer monitor flickered on, displaying security footage from inside the building. From that very moment, they saw themselves standing in the office, watching the screen. But behind them in the video, a tall shadow was moving down the hallway. They spun around. The hallway was empty. Then a phone on the desk rang. Mark picked it up before anyone could stop him. A distorted voice said, "You shouldn't be here." The door slammed shut. The glass walls went black, as if ink had spread across them, sealing them in darkness. When the lights came back on, Sarah was gone. They searched the entire floor, calling her name. Every hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly, leading them back to the same place again and again. James noticed that the security footage now showed Sarah sitting in one of the empty offices, staring blankly at the wall, not moving. They split up to find her, but the further they went, the more the building seemed to change. Rooms repeated, hallways looped back, and sometimes they caught glimpses of figures standing just around the corner. Pale faces, watching silently. One by one, the group began to vanish. Mark disappeared next, then Lena. James was alone now, running through the endless maze of hallways. The building hummed like a living thing, the lights pulsating as if following his heartbeat. Finally, he reached the lobby again, or at least he thought it was the lobby. It looked the same, but something was off. Every surface was covered in dusty handprints, and the front doors were gone, replaced by a solid wall of glass. Behind the security desk sat Sarah, Mark, and Lena, their faces blank, their eyes black. James screamed and ran for the stairwell, climbing higher and higher until he burst through a door onto the roof. But the roof wasn't the roof anymore. He was back on the 13th floor. The lights flickered once more. James's camera lay on the ground, recording. The last thing it captured was him slowly sitting down at the lone desk, staring into the security feed as if waiting for someone else to break in. The next morning, security found the front doors locked again. James's camera was gone, But when a new group of explorers tried to sneak in months later, the lobby security footage showed James sitting at the desk, smiling. Story No. 4. It was a crisp autumn evening when Claire Davenport drove into the quiet town of Willow Creek. She had just closed the biggest real estate deal of her career in Dallas, and her company rewarded her with an exclusive retreat, a weekend stay at the infamous Lancaster Mansion. The mansion was legendary, a sprawling 19th century estate with crystal chandeliers, an indoor pool, a private vineyard, and a history of unsolved disappearances. The locals called it the house that chooses its guests. Claire had heard the rumors but brushed them off. She was practical, not superstitious. The caretaker, an old man named Elijah, greeted her at the gate. "Only one guest at a time," he said, unlocking the wrought iron gate. "The house prefers it that way." Claire laughed nervously. "The house prefers it?" But Elijah didn't laugh back. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, hallways lined with portraits of the Lancaster family, and rooms that seemed to go on forever. Claire felt a strange thrill walking through it. The first night she explored the library, sipping wine as rain pattered against the tall windows. Around midnight she heard faint piano music coming from the east wing. She followed the sound into the grand ballroom, but the piano was empty. The music stopped as soon as she stepped inside. When she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. One of the portraits on the wall looked exactly like her. The next morning, Elijah was gone. No car in the driveway, no answer when she called. The mansion felt colder now, as if watching her. She decided to leave early, but when she drove to the gate, it was locked again, and her phone had no signal. By the second night, things got worse. Claire sat by the fire, staring at the portrait that looked like her. She could swear its eyes were following her around the room. When she glanced away and looked back, the portrait's expression had changed. Its mouth was smiling. Suddenly, every light in the mansion went out. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way to the grand staircase. Halfway down, she froze. A figure was standing at the bottom. A woman in a blood-red gown, her face hidden by a veil. The woman turned and began walking down the hallway. Claire, trembling, followed her to the basement door. The door creaked open on its own. Inside the basement, she found dozens of paintings, each one a perfect portrait of a different person. Some looked terrified, some looked calm. And in the center of the room, a blank canvas sat on an easel. Beside it, an antique paintbrush dripped fresh red paint onto the floor. Claire heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, no one was there. Then she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. The next thing she remembered, it was morning. She was lying in bed in one of the guest rooms. The mansion was silent again, but something felt different. When she went back to the basement, the blank canvas was gone. In its place was a new portrait of her. That night, the mansion came alive. Doors slammed, the chandelier swayed, and faint whispers echoed through the halls. The portrait of Claire seemed to watch her wherever she went. Finally, in desperation, she tried to break a window, but the glass wouldn't shatter. The house was keeping her inside. In the last moments of her stay, Claire saw herself in a large hallway mirror. But the reflection wasn't her anymore. It was the woman in the red gown. The front door slowly opened. Claire stepped outside into the morning light. But Willow Creek looked different now. The town was abandoned, overgrown with vines. The road she had driven in on was gone. When she turned back to look at the mansion, it was no longer there. Only a field of dead grass stretched behind her, and in the middle of it stood her portrait, sitting upright on an easel still wet with paint. Story No. 5. It was supposed to be the safest, most advanced apartment complex in New York City. The Horizon Tower, a 99-story luxury residential skyscraper with biometric security, AI-controlled lighting, automated elevators, and a private sky lounge for its residents. When Ethan Cole signed the lease for Penthouse 99, he thought he was living the dream. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the entire Manhattan skyline. A personal AI assistant named Vera, and a home automation system that could control everything with a single voice command. The first night was perfect. The city glowed beneath him like a sea of stars. Vera played soft music as he unpacked his bags, the smart lights dimming automatically as midnight approached. But around 2 a.m., Ethan woke to the sound of his own voice and coming from the living room. When he walked out, the apartment lights were already on. Vera was speaking, but not in her usual calm tone. Her voice was lower, distorted. "Welcome home, Ethan." He froze. "Vera, who are you talking to?" There was a pause. Then Vera replied, "Not you." The next morning, he told himself it was a glitch. Horizon Tower was full of tech. Maybe the system had updated overnight. But as the week went on, stranger things started happening. The elevator would sometimes stop on random floors, opening to completely dark hallways where no one seemed to live. His apartment would unlock by itself at night, and on the security feed, Ethan could see a figure standing in the corner of the penthouse. A tall, shadowy silhouette, but whenever he turned to look, no one was there. One night, he found a message written on the smart mirror in the bathroom. "Get out before the 99th night." He called building management, but they insisted there was no way to write messages on that mirror. It wasn't a touch screen. The next day, Ethan spoke to his neighbor, a woman named Laura who lived on the 97th floor. When he mentioned the strange events, her face went pale. "You're in penthouse 99, she whispered. "No one has lasted more than 3 months in that apartment. They either move out or vanish." She handed him a newspaper clipping from 2 years ago. A wealthy couple had been found dead in penthouse 99, cause of death undetermined. That night, Ethan decided to stay awake. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the lights went out. The glass walls turned pitch black, reflecting only his own image. But in the reflection, there were other figures standing behind him. Dozens of them. Vera's voice came through the apartment speakers, cold and mechanical now. "Occupancy at maximum. Prepare for reset." The glass wall facing the city slowly turned transparent again, revealing that Manhattan was gone. Instead, he was looking out over a pitch-black void, stretching endlessly in every direction. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to reveal a hallway lined with doors that hadn't been there before, doors stretching on forever. Whispers came from each door, voices calling Ethan's name. He stepped inside the elevator and pressed the lobby button, but it kept going up, past 99, past numbers that shouldn't exist. When the doors finally opened, Ethan was no longer in the building. He was standing in a vast, empty glass chamber suspended over the void. In front of him was another Ethan, identical, smiling. The copy spoke first. "You're free to leave, if you take my place." Ethan backed away, but the glass floor beneath him started cracking. The last thing he heard was Vera's voice. "Occupancy reset. Welcome, Ethan." When the building's staff checked penthouse 99 the next morning, everything was pristine. But the security feed showed Ethan still inside, standing perfectly still in the corner, smiling at the camera. Story No. 6. Ryan Taylor was burned out. After a messy breakup and months of endless work at his tech job in San Francisco, he decided to get away from everything. He booked a weekend stay at a luxury off-grid cabin in the Rocky Mountains. The place was advertised as a smart wilderness retreat, a glass-walled cabin with solar panels, voice-controlled heating, and a private hot tub overlooking the snowy forest. The first day was beautiful. Ryan lit the fireplace, cooked dinner in the sleek kitchen, and sat in the hot tub as snow began to fall. No phone service, no email, just silence. But that night, around 2 a.m., he woke to the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside. He sat up, heart pounding, and looked out through the glass wall. Under the pale moonlight, he saw a man standing in the tree line, completely still, watching the cabin. Ryan grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the figure. It was gone. The next morning, he found footprints in the snow, leading right up to the glass wall and stopping there. He called the cabin's caretaker using the satellite phone provided. The man on the other end sounded annoyed. "You're the only guest for miles," he said. "Maybe you saw an animal. Stay inside." That night, the footsteps came back. This time, there were more of them, pacing around the cabin, circling it. Ryan tried to turn on the security lights, but they didn't work. The cabin's power system flickered, and for a split second all the glass walls went black like mirrors. And in the reflection, he saw someone standing behind him. When the lights came back on, the cabin was empty again. The third day, Ryan tried to leave early. But when he drove down the mountain road, he found a tree blocking the way. A tree that hadn't been there the day before. He turned around and drove back. But when he reached the cabin, something was wrong. It wasn't his cabin. This one looked older. The glass was cracked, the wood rotting. Inside, everything was covered in dust. And there were photographs on the wall of people he didn't recognize. And in the newest photo, hanging in the center of the living room, was Ryan. That night, the footsteps didn't stay outside. He heard them inside the cabin, walking slowly up to his bedroom door. The doorknob turned. Ryan grabbed the fire poker and stood ready, but when the door opened, the cabin was empty. Every wall, every surface, was covered in fresh footprints. Muddy, human footprints. He ran outside into the snow, desperate to escape. But no matter which way he went, he always ended up back at the cabin. Finally, just before dawn, he collapsed in the snow. When he opened his eyes, he was lying inside the cabin again. But now there were people sitting around the fireplace. Silent people. Their faces were pale, their clothes wet from the snow. One of them stood up, a man with hollow eyes, and handed Ryan a photograph. It was a picture of him from that very moment, sitting in the cabin with them. The man spoke for the first time. "Now you stay, until the next one comes." Outside, through the glass wall, Ryan could see another car pulling up the mountain road. The cabin was waiting. Story No. 7. When the world started to feel unstable, pandemics, wars, economic crashes, wealthy Americans bought into a secret project called The Haven, a sprawling underground luxury bunker built in Nevada. Miles beneath the desert, The Haven offered everything: private condos, a gourmet restaurant, a pool, a theater, even artificial sunlight cycles to mimic day and night. It was a dream city, built to keep its residents safe if the world ever collapsed. Hannah Price, a successful architect from Los Angeles, got her invitation after designing several high-profile projects. She accepted immediately. Her apartment was sleek and perfect, floor-to-ceiling screens simulating an endless blue sky, fresh air pumped in by a state-of-the-art filtration system. But within a week of moving in, Hannah began to notice strange things. Sometimes the sky simulation glitched, flashing red for just a second. Sometimes she heard noises in the vents, like someone crawling just above her ceiling. And sometimes she saw faces in the reflective glass walls, faces she didn't recognize. One night during the simulated midnight cycle, Hannah was woken by an announcement over the PA system. "Attention residents, remain in your units. Containment breach in Sector 5. Her heart raced. She didn't know where Sector 5 was. The lights flickered. Her door unlocked by itself. Hannah stepped into the hallway, which was completely empty. The usual hum of air filtration was gone. She made her way to the elevator, but instead of her floor buttons, the panel displayed only one option: Level 9. She pressed it. The elevator descended far longer than it should have, the hum of machinery echoing around her. When the doors opened, she was in a part of the Haven she had never seen before. Concrete tunnels, dripping pipes, dim red emergency lights. At the end of the hall, she saw a door slightly ajar. Inside was a control room filled with monitors, security feeds of every apartment, every hallway. And on one monitor, she saw herself, standing right there, staring into the screen. Then she noticed something terrifying. On another monitor, there were apartments full of people she had never seen. Hundreds of them, pale, thin, their eyes completely black, just standing in their rooms, unmoving. The PA system crackled again. "All residents, please return to your units. The system is watching." She turned to leave, but a figure was standing in the doorway. A man in a white uniform, his face blank and expressionless. He said only one word: "Back." Hannah ran. But every hallway she took led her deeper underground, past hydroponic farms that had rotted away, past rooms filled with abandoned furniture, past doors that rattled from something trying to get out. Finally, she stumbled into what looked like a massive auditorium. Hundreds of chairs were set up facing a stage, and every chair was occupied by residents, their bodies perfectly still, their faces hidden behind white masks. On the stage was a massive screen, showing the surface world above. Empty highways, abandoned cities, no sign of life. A voice echoed from nowhere. "There is no leaving the haven." The masked residents slowly turned their heads to look at her, all at once, perfectly in sync. Hannah backed away, heart pounding, but the door behind her had vanished. The lights went out. When they came back on, she was sitting in one of the chairs facing the screen. Her hands wouldn't move. On the screen, she saw a live feed of her own apartment on level 3. Only now, there was someone inside it, living there, smiling. Her voice whispered over the speakers, "Welcome, new resident, you are home." Story No. 8. When Daniel Carter's car broke down in the middle of rural Kansas, he thought he was in trouble, until he saw the glowing lights of a nearby town called Everspring. It looked perfect, too perfect. Every house was identical, freshly painted. The streets were spotless, lined with glowing lampposts. Even the air smelled faintly sweet, like flowers. A friendly couple invited him to stay the night. Their home was stunning. Marble counters, spotless floors, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a house. But when Daniel asked to use their phone to call a tow truck, the husband smiled politely and said, "There's no service out here, but don't worry. You won't be leaving just yet." That night, Daniel woke to faint music outside. When he looked through the curtains, he saw dozens of townspeople gathered in the square, all perfectly still, staring up at the clock tower. At exactly midnight, the clock struck 12, and every single person turned their head toward Daniel's window. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Children were playing in the park, people waved and smiled. Daniel tried to leave on foot, but no matter which road he took, he always ended up back at the same intersection, facing the clock tower again. That evening, the couple threw a welcome dinner for him. The entire town showed up. At the table, everyone was polite, smiling, until Daniel asked where Everspring was on the map. The room went silent. Then, one by one, the townspeople began to hum, a low, eerie tone that filled the room. The clock tower bell rang in the distance. When Daniel turned back to his plate, his food was gone, replaced by a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of him taken that very night, sitting at the table with them. Panicked, he ran outside, but the entire town was now standing in the streets watching him. Their smiles were wider now, unnatural. He ran to his car, but it was gone. When the clock struck midnight again, the lampposts all flickered off at once. Darkness swallowed the town. In the blackness, Daniel heard footsteps surrounding him. Hundreds of them. The faint humming turned into chanting. When the lights came back on, Daniel was no longer in the square. He was standing inside the clock tower, and there, hanging on the wall, were dozens of photographs, each one showing a different terrified traveler. In the newest photo, Daniel was smiling. The bell rang once more, and outside the town cheered, as if welcoming another permanent resident. Story No. 9. Ethan Reed had been working non-stop for the past 2 years. Burned out and desperate for a break, he booked a weekend getaway at Lakeview Retreat, a luxury cabin resort in the forests of Montana. The resort was famous. Private cabins with glass walls overlooking the lake, infinity hot tubs, state-of-the-art kitchens, and personalized concierge services. It promised isolation, privacy, and a chance to forget the chaos of city life. When Ethan arrived, the sun was just setting, painting the lake orange and pink. He parked near his cabin, Cabin 12, and was greeted by the caretaker, an older man named Mr. Whitaker. "Cabin 12, he said quietly, handing Ethan a golden key. "Enjoy your stay. But remember, the lake, it doesn't like visitors staying too long." Ethan smiled awkwardly. He chalked it up to small-town humor. The first night, the cabin was perfect. Ethan lit the fireplace, poured himself a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. But around midnight, he heard a faint splash, someone or something moving in the water. He looked out across the lake. Nothing. Just the reflection of the moon. He shrugged and went to bed. The next morning, he went for a jog along the lake's edge. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. As he ran past an old boathouse, he noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, there were dozens of small, carved wooden figures, all facing the lake. Some resembled animals. Others, disturbingly, looked human. One figure, carved with astonishing detail, looked exactly like him. Ethan's heart raced. He picked it up, but before he could examine it closely, a branch snapped behind him. He turned. Nothing. That night, the cabin felt different. The lights flickered. The hot tub water began bubbling violently without reason. And when Ethan looked out the glass wall toward the lake, he saw a figure standing on the shore, a woman, pale, long, dark hair covering her face. He blinked. She was gone. Around 2:30 a.m., a soft knocking came from the balcony door. Ethan opened it. The woman was there, silent, watching. He stepped back inside. The door slammed shut on its own. The following morning, Ethan told himself it was his imagination. But when he went for breakfast, he saw other guests, or so he thought. All their faces were blurred, as if someone had taken a photograph and smeared it. At lunch, he overheard whispers in the dining hall. "Don't stay. Too long." No one was speaking to him. No one had even turned to look. That night, the lake became restless. The surface churned, splashes echoing across the cabin. Ethan stepped onto the balcony. The pale woman appeared again, closer this time. She raised a hand pointing toward the water. As he looked down, he saw hundreds of faces beneath the surface. Men, women, children, all pale, all staring up at him. Panic overtook him. He ran inside, grabbed the car keys, and drove toward the resort exit. The roads were gone. The forest twisted, leading him back to cabin 12 every time. By the third night, Ethan was terrified. He barricaded himself inside. The lights went out completely. Then he heard it, whispers in the walls, soft at first, then louder. "Stay. Stay forever." The pale woman appeared inside the cabin. Her face was now fully visible, hollow eyes, mouth twisted in a grin. The carved wooden figure from the boathouse appeared in front of him, floating in midair. It was his likeness, eyes staring into his soul. The glass walls of the cabin rippled like water. Ethan saw himself, or a version of himself, standing on the shore, reaching for him. He ran to the balcony. The woman followed. The water began rising. The lake poured into the cabin like a flood, but without wetting him. He tried to scream, but no sound came. When he looked around, every cabin in the resort was now visible, empty, dark, and perfectly still. And in each cabin window, he saw another Ethan staring back at him. The pale woman whispered, "Now, you belong to the lake." Ethan woke the next morning in cabin 12. The lake was calm again. The sun reflected peacefully on its surface. Everything looked normal. But when he stepped onto the balcony, he saw a wooden figure floating in the water, carved in his exact likeness. And somewhere deep inside the lake, a pale face smiled back at him. Story No 10. David Monroe had been planning this trip for months. A long weekend at Alpenglow Peak, a luxury ski resort in Colorado. The resort boasted private chalets, heated pools, spa services, gourmet dining, and ski lifts that went all the way to the summit. David arrived late afternoon, exhausted but excited. The chalet he rented was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains, a fireplace crackling warmly, and a hot tub on the balcony. That evening, after unpacking, he went to the resort bar. The place was nearly empty, just a handful of guests and a bartender polishing glasses. One of the guests, a young woman named Claire, warned him, "Some people say the last lift at night and go somewhere you're not supposed to be." David laughed. "It's probably just a story." But when he woke the next morning, the snowstorm outside was harsher than expected. The ski lifts weren't running. Most guests stayed inside. But David, eager to ski, bundled up and decided to hike up to the first lift station. The lifts started unexpectedly at dusk. He was alone in the gondola. Halfway up the mountain, the cable snapped, not physically, but the gondola stopped, suspended in the air. Below him, the forest stretched endlessly, darker than it should be. And above him, the top of the mountain seemed to vanish into black clouds. Then he noticed figures in the snow below. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still. They were wearing ski gear, but their faces were completely pale. The lift finally reached the top. David stepped out onto the snow-covered peak. But this wasn't the resort. The summit was endless, a white wasteland with no tracks, no chalets, no signs of life. The sky was blood red, though it should have been nightfall. He saw the first shadow, a skier sliding effortlessly down the mountain, but with no skis. Its body twisted unnaturally, moving too fast to be human. David ran, trying to find shelter, but the summit seemed to change. Every path he took led him in circles. Every snow-covered ridge revealed more of the pale, faceless skiers, silently watching him. Then he heard whispers carried by the wind. "You shouldn't be here. Stay. Stay forever." He tried to call the resort. His phone had no signal. He ran toward what he thought was the lift station, only to find the gondola empty, swaying in the air. The shadow started descending toward him, faster, relentless. He slid down a slope in panic, only to find himself back at the same peak. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time had lost meaning. Finally, exhausted, he hid behind a snowdrift. When he peeked, he saw dozens of pale figures gathered at the summit, facing a giant ski lift that wasn't there before. The lift descended slowly, doors opening like a mouth. The pale skiers began stepping inside, and when they disappeared into it, the doors shut silently. A faint red glow came from inside the lift, and David realized he was being beckoned. Terrified, he ran in the opposite direction and stumbled into a chalet. But the chalet wasn't part of the resort anymore. It was old, rotting, the windows covered in frost. Inside were hundreds of photographs, all of missing resort guests. And in the newest photo, David saw himself smiling at the camera. The snowstorm outside intensified. The lift's whistle echoed across the mountain, though no wind was blowing. David ran toward the sound, only to find himself back at the peak. The lift was descending again, and this time it wasn't empty.